Welcome. So what I'd like to talk about today is what happened in Kent and the journey that I took with colleagues in Kent. Kent was a cold spot with respect to engineering education. The University of Kent only did electrical engineering. So this is part of, before I arrived there, the journey to create those STEM skill sets that were needed down in Kent. Because what was actually happening, students were leaving Kent to go and study up in London and then not returning, which was having a desperate impact actually on the regional businesses. And if you're not aware, engineering impacts all of your lives. If it's not grown or biological, an engineer has touched it. Everything you touch every day, the food you eat, the things you sit on, the carpets, etc., an engineer has been involved on. And we have an international shortage of engineers. So it's an area I'm passionate about in developing. We also have the biggest complaint from industry that we're not producing industry-ready graduates. And I know there's some passionate work happening in the University of Sheffield, which is my alma mater, also here at UCL as well, trying to address that industry ready. We've for years been producing very theoretical engineers and not very engineers who like to do. So that was also a challenge. Also, we have been attracting females, but very small numbers into engineering. It's not very diverse, and we're bleeding that talent out. They don't even make it into industry. We were sitting around at the start of this project, around 7-8% of engineers across the sector were female. And certainly work at the Royal Academy of Engineers, students who are from Black and Asian backgrounds, so global majority students, only 14% of them were successfully gaining graduate employment in engineering. So as I highlighted earlier, we were bleeding talent, but what was even more frightening, even if they were interested in getting into engineering from Kent, 80 students applied for mechanical engineering in 2017, only 10 of them were accepted nationally to study engineering. And I will go on to explain why that was the case. So the original vision was not mine. It was actually Professor Helen James, who is an extremely good friend of mine now and was my boss. She set up and got the first batch of funding for it. So we got funding from the Office of Students and we got funding from what's known as the Local Enterprise Partnership. And they successfully secured about 12.6 million funds to start the project because we needed absolute facilities. You've got to bear in mind, Canterbury Christ Church University was a humanities university, had a very small science department. And some of you who have an understanding of engineering and science will suddenly grasp some of the challenges that needed to happen in a university that never had engineering. But Helen's vision was a much bigger vision. It was not only about producing engineering graduates, it was about engaging with industry. It was also worrying about that talent pipeline because engineering is not talked about in schools. Primary school teachers in the UK, the only requirement of they're not even required necessarily having a science GCSE. It is compulsory they study science in this country at GCSE, but they're more likely to have studied biology. So their last science education is at 16 and then they're being primary school teachers. So this has a detrimental impact on STEM in this country. So we were trying to bite the whole thing off, from worrying about from nursery education right through to graduate employment. And this was Helen's vision. And she brought me in. The first part was the bulk of that 12.6 million went into that building, which is a truly STEM building. We have in there sports science, biology, chemistry, psychology, engineering. So it was really well engineered to support all of the different STEM subjects. If you actually went to the engineering floor, it is completely engineered because I engineered it. I designed it. So there isn't pillars in the way, upsetting lines of vision for education, and really worked effectively to that. The reason why it's named after Rena Holmes, she was the first president of the Women in Engineering Society in the UK, who was a qualified graduate engineer from Loughborough University. And she ran her own engineering business in Kent. She was from Kent. She was also a nurse during the World War. So that tied in with the fact we've got nursing facilities in the building, so it was very timely to name it after her and bring a hidden history of a very famous engineer, which was hidden in history, out to the forefront. So success factors that Helen encouraged in us all in part of that journey was to be bold and brave in our leadership and really challenge things. So it's about that authentic leadership that both Helen and I led. An absolute commitment to EDI, and Helen wouldn't tolerate it. Now, some of that challenges we had to start with was actually getting the Strategic Industry Advisory panel right. When I first went down there, one of the panel board members insisted on meeting me and then giving me an engineering test to double check I got the engineering knowledge. You can imagine Helen hitting the roof at that point. So this was some of the challenges we were having to change, mindsets of people we were interacting with outside as well as internally. So changing that power and influence. Why does EDI matter? Well, it's absolutely fundamental and it's a real problem in engineering. Women today still are the biggest people who, if you're involved in a car accident, will be worse affected by that car accident in injuries and more likely to be killed. And it's principally because of this reason. And bear in mind, the female test dummy only existed until very recently. We had children test dummies before a female. We even had the pregnant woman, so the fetus was more important than the woman, before we had the female test dummy. And it's still a problem because we're looking at only the 5th percentile. Now, how many of you have got female family members with a shoe size less than 6? Yeah. So imagine driving a car, long distance, with your foot suspended in the air. Because that's what happens when you have a shoe size less than 6. Our spatial awareness is completely different as well, because this distance is smaller and this distance is smaller. So all the pillars in cars are designed for male spatial awareness, which is the reason why statistically women do have car accidents in car parking spaces, because of our spatial awareness is different. So it's not women drivers, it is the car. But why does it really matter? At the end of the day, you're only going to get buy-in with industry. Sorry, I know I need to stand still and I'm not very good at that. It does make a profitable difference. It's a shame that we have now politicians who don't get this. And we are in a very challenging times at the moment. But also it improves health and safety. I have a husband who works in the construction industry that I'm married in my early 90s, where it was quite normal that people would be killed on site. It's absolutely unheard of today. So that's the revolution that can actually happen and passionately care about that. So health and safety, PPE, making sure PPE works for both genders and different people in shapes and sizes. It's more ethical. The world actually has a greater population of 51%. The games industry finally realised that only selling to 16 and 30-year-old males was a bit narrow. The biggest games market now is females and has been for the last 10 years. And you opened up to bigger markets. London is a classic example as well. It's 40% global majority. So everybody's having to address some differences in London to address that. And absolutely, it's the moral right. So creating a new school of ETD, it was really important then. I went back to the literature and went for all different subject areas and read round and needed to understand how am I going to attract people with protected characteristics to engineering. So what was absolutely critical was some work with, Lawson is actually based at Canterbury Christ Church University, with some of the work we were already doing, outreach within primary and secondary education. What we were able to prove was actually doing Saturday clubs and outreach activities that were meaningful, that linked to the national curriculum at every key stage. Now, we're bearing, in the UK, the key stage learning is from nursery, so that's 3-year-olds, right up to 18-year-olds. And if we did meaningful STEM interaction with them that linked to the national curriculum, they would follow through to STEM careers. So that's really important, how you do that interaction. Student marketing was really important. And I did a quick survey of lots of different universities' websites, and some of them only down the road from here, which were very white, very male. And we know mirror image absolutely is really important. But we also know from research that's been done in the Netherlands that language matters, and that actually women will not apply for jobs if it's very masculine worded. And you put high criteria against it, and women will actually go through that criteria, and if they don't match all of that criteria, they won't apply. Well, surely that applies to people going to university as well. So we gender decoded how we presented engineering, put it through the gender decoders that are available now for recruitment practices for our marketing material. We made sure imagery represented what we wanted, a balance of global majority white, female, male, mature students, disabled students. Admittedly, I would have to remind marketing every year when they brought the photographer in. And I said, why am I repeating myself all the time? But you have to, unfortunately. I recruited EDI staff and created an EDI environment for that. I got to 38% female engineering and computing staff. That's unheard of in the sector. 54% of my staff were global majority. 12% of my staff had declared disability. I would say more of my staff were probably neurodiverse, but they hadn't declared. For those of you who are not aware, but computing science and engineering does attract more neurodiverse people. And statistically, in my experience, that's been around 20-25%. I've been in the sector for 30 years. This year, the university I currently work for, the current first years and foundation year is at 40%. I just thought that's because we're a very wide in participation university. I recently did accreditation at a very prestigious Russell Group university in the UK, and they were reporting the same, which is interesting. So we adopted inclusive recruitment practices, how we advertised that job, gender neutral, etc. Went back to the literature and made sure we did that to attract the right staff in. Facilities, made sure they had support in that mirror image. One of the biggest things I did was decals on the first floor, and those decals actually highlighted hidden heroes, both from different areas and backgrounds and their history. So we're creating constantly that mirror image understanding in that environment. And we created inclusive estates facilities. So using row-clock tables or round tables doesn't allow people to create hierarchies. I have seen some bad behaviours in the past where people have used their bulk and build to exclude members from group work. And inclusive PPE. Believe me or not, that's the hardest one. The female science coats or engineering coats that we needed in the workshops came from China, and they all thought we were Chinese, Malaysian women, much smaller. So there is still problems that we've got to work through with the supply chain. But this was the picture I was dealing with down in Kent. So it is standard for engineering, we need maths. Historically, we would also ask for physics or further maths. But here in Kent, the only thing that we knew we could get was maths, because Kent is actually 70 miles across, so about 140 kilometres. So Maidstone, which is where A-level maths is hot, or where you've got physics A-level, but you need to live in Canterbury to be able to study chemistry A-levels. That's not going to be realistic. So one of the things was we opened up more of what actually entry requirements do we want to enable to bring people in. The positive side, because of the outreach and all the meaningful STEM we did, and supporting all the schools and training that education, it increased the demand for STEM A-levels. And by the time I left last summer, the only county in the UK, so that's England and Wales, that offers A-levels, that had an increase in STEM engagement in physical numbers as well as percentages was Kent. The government will say in percentages STEM had gone up nationally. It hadn't. In real numbers terms, it had nosedived. So we were making a difference. So both the male and female. And what was really important was the amount of computer science females were taking up as well, which in the light of AI is actually really positive. So the new school is important. As part of that, we were adopting the CDIO, which is Conceive, Design, Implement and Operate Pedagogical, that came out of Institute of Massachusetts. It's really popular in Europe and it really supports that working engagement. And I like the fact it links in with Kolb theory of education. But it also helps support that engineering mindset and give us that epistemic insight. So knowledge for knowledge's sake and questioning it and critiquing it. So it promotes that activity to doing. But we also worked with employers to create that inclusive engagement within that and industry-ready projects, which, you know, because we did capstone projects every year, they were doing real projects for industry. We also, past that, I did, notice I'm a female, I always use the we. I developed the curriculum that actually was decolonized and got them challenging that and rethinking that to bring it in to support the students. Thinking about inclusive engineering. The students were so bought into it when one of the projects we were doing for actually a member of staff who got severe MS and was having real problems with fine motor neurons of moving his wheelchair. We set that as a project to change drives for that. The students just went off. They were reading British medical journals, Q1 journals, in their first year, understanding the science behind MS to inform the engineering that they needed to do. One of the things they learn is that actually if you have more than one nerve ending being used, you actually make their MS worse. So actually that makes a real difference then how you're going to use those drives. Instead of using 2 fingers, which is 4 nerve endings, which will impact the MS. So they really thought about that and impacted on their thinking. Some of the best work I can highlight that actually is a useful toolkit out there is Bodhi's. She's developed a toolkit for academics to understand how do you manage group work and make it more inclusive. Because historically in engineering, the females end up doing the engineering management and all the boys do the techie stuff. The girls might walk out with a 2-1 and a first, but they don't have their confidence and their technical skills as a result. It's important the academics facilitate that to make sure that engineering management leadership is rotated around and everybody does some technical. But we didn't stop there. The latter piece of the work that I've been doing that's funded by the Royal Academy of Engineers has been developing a toolkit to support students into graduate employment. As I highlighted earlier, the Royal Academy of Engineers was highlighting that our global majority students in the UK were not gaining into employment. Same with females. So there were significant disparities going on. So this toolkit is openly available to everybody. If you search EPC toolkits, you'll gain access to it so you can use it. And one of the things we did was work with first year students to create an allyship game. And that was to help about understanding in the work environment about microaggressions and how to address them. Because at the end of the day, employees leave businesses because of other employees. It's not the job, it's the people. And it's about developing them to understand that. And as the students have highlighted, they found that really helpful to rethink what they were doing. Employers, we did it, it's an activity that shouldn't be played one-on with the computer. It's done as a discussion group, so they really learn from it. What was even more fantastic, this was done through self-directed learning with the first years. They reflected on this and went, ooh, my leadership style in group work is I set the bar up here and my peers are somewhere here and I take over. That might not be a good idea. And they changed how they've done the group work and been more inclusive. Happy accident. So the lessons learned. Mirror image matters. Language matters and how it lands to support your peers and colleagues and students within that. EDI policy has to be lived and honest and kept at if you don't. But you have to think about good design from every aspect of characteristics. Invest in your staff and students' development and don't assume you've done your staff development. You have to do it again and again and again. It's a bit like a Groundhog Day, but I'm learning that. I'm no longer at Canterbury Christ Church. They're restructuring at the moment. They're a little bit lost at the moment. And it's very noticeable that there isn't Helen and me go in there constantly working with it. People do EDI is hard. You've got to work at it, and it's a lot of work, but you have to keep going. And understand your regional and cultural differences, and you'll make a difference. And reciprocal mentoring is really important. Students can learn from staff, but staff can learn from students by listening, and it does make a big difference. I know this because actually it made a huge difference to our awarding gaps and another institution I worked at when I got the staff to think in that reciprocal manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have just a question about primary school teacher. They are almost females. And what do you mean about, how do you say, growing a sowing seed with in the art to teach because of female teachers during the primary school? Does it have an effect? Yes.
So some of the work we've been doing is working with primary engineers. So primary engineers bring in engineers who are in industry, which often are male, but then supporting them because primary engineers have done it linked to the national curriculum. So helping the primary school teachers understand the activity that they're going to do, how that links in with the national curriculum. But it's showing again, so they're giving them confidence and language to link in engineering to the subject area and still meet their KPIs that they've got to do for the national curriculum. So it's opening up those conversations. I'm from the north of England, so my language, Sheffield is an engineering city, and our language is littered with colloquialisms that are engineering, but that's not the case in Kent. So it's about building all of that up so people then have the confidence with that.
Just as an aside, your list of good design, good ideas, I noticed you didn't have aging as one of your design ideas.
So yes, it does. And we have mature students, and that's the areas that work. So down in Canterbury Christ Church, actually, there's been some significant research been going on about Alzheimer's and an Alzheimer's village, and interacting with us as engineers and understanding that. And I was somewhere else yesterday where we're really talking about getting the engineers thinking about that and designing for the ageing environment. So yes, they are encouraged to think about all characteristics. We have the advantage in the UK, we have the Equality Act from 2010, which defines all of that. So we encourage them to get to know that act and helps them understand all of those characteristics.
That's good. That's good. Should be enforced.
Yes.
Emphasized in every list.
Yes.
Because we are getting older.
Yes.
And we need embryos, and it's
yeah.
not just Alzheimer's. But thank you.
Yeah.
Maria Takini, who is that? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I could see that this was a big project. I wanted to ask how you went about getting the buy-in from the various stakeholders, since it seems it's a project that covers a lot of departments, especially the schooling system, and you are coming from the university. That was my question.
So it's not just the buy-in across the university, it's the buy-in outside of the university as well. Yeah, lots of meetings, lots of conversations, identifying how we could collaborate. So with stakeholders from industry, they were gaining their buy-in that they were going to get inclusive staff, because they had to change some of their practices to recruit those graduates within that. But also they were constantly aware they were struggling to get staff. Again, with the schools, working with head teachers, deputy head teachers, teachers. So lots and lots of meetings and collaborating with them to support that. And the same, I worked across the university. I had to change a lot of things in the university. We had to change the whole health and safety culture in the university. When I went there, we have something called learning support plans in the UK to support students with disabilities. The learning support areas, the university assumed everybody did exams. And engineers and computing don't. They do a lot of coursework. And so I had to work with the library services and learning support to explain what is good practice and what is good practice learning support plans for disabled students for coursework. So it was a question, people came to me and I went to them. It was not sitting in the office, it was going out and constantly having conversations and challenging things in a very politically diplomatic way.
Melina, we have a question over here as well. Up to you.
Thank you very much for the nice discussion. I'm really impressed what you are doing. A great job. My question is, you are mainly concerned about engineering. So in the current era of AI, do you work on engineering in terms of like digital humanities? The interest is growing, so people are bridging the gap. Different apps and all those in terms of research, like neurofunctional or cognitive aspects of language, how it is analyzed and interpreted. Secondly, my question is, are you only working for UK, or are you considering the rest of the world as well in terms of going against the norms, whatever that is? Thank you very much.
So the student population, we was global. We did have international students, and particularly we were attracting a lot of female students from Pakistan, which was really positive, both in computing and engineering. With respect to, so yes, we were placing it in global context, because in reality, despite the onshoring that's going on, there is still a global supply chain. There will always be in engineering. So it's actually important. Engineers, wherever they learn in the world, need to understand their context and be able to work across borders. So yes, we were always working regionally, nationally, and globally. And one of the projects we did was actually for a local surgical surgeon who had his own private SME, and he commissioned the students to design a surgical tool for piles for being used in developing countries. And the primary use was that you've got to be able to use it, and then it must fail after single use, which for the students were like, sustainability. And they went, no, the threat of dying from sepsis is so great, it's got to fail. That project is carried on. It's now supported down there. It's funded by the government, and will go out to be a product that will be manufactured overseas and used in developing countries, making safe, cheap surgical instruments available for pile surgery, which is absolutely needed. So yeah, they had to understand the context for doing that. So it was great fun. Now for the AI. I'm now at Wrexham. I have a wonderful faculty, which is arts, computing and engineering, which is creative media, arts. So it's all creative industries. And if you weren't aware, Bill Gates on Monday announced that the 3 careers that are actually AI is probably going to complement but not take away is health, the arts, and engineering and computing. We already have on the engineering CAD systems, AI systems in there to help with the design. And so we're already bedding that into the education. And we were already doing that down at Canterbury Christ Church and using ChatGPT in a very positive way to support the education. You are talking to somebody who's dyslexic. My father-in-law, when he was alive, used to proofread everything I wrote. He's no longer with me. I've survived for 10 years without somebody. It's been really challenging. ChatGPT's come along and it's great. I'm so polite to it. It corrects my spelling, my grammar, it gives me feedback. My abstracts have really strengthened as a result from its feedback. So for me, it's a wonderful tool and using it in a positive way. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're embedding it with the right way. Because at the end of the day, everybody's using it in employment now. And industry is actually moaning graduates are graduating without understanding how to use AI.
First off, we have a rather surprising question for 2025. What is EDI?
Oh, sorry. So traditionally it means equality, diversity, and inclusion, but actually it should be equity, diversity, inclusion. So it's creating the equal opportunity, but equitably. And we do live in challenging times at the moment, which is quite sad, really. I am already aware, my current institution, we got work with America, and we got told we had to change our EDI policy. And we went, we can't. It's law in the UK.
Speaking of challenges, there's a question here. You talked about the initial challenge of building inclusive industry support. What made the difference in changing that dynamic and understanding?
It's about conversations in a very diplomatic way, helping them to see the impact of their actions could have on people. Because at the end of the day, in an employed environment, again, it's employees who upset employees. So I had one SME guy who was talking, he says, I always do an icebreaker question and ask them which football club do they support. So I then explained to him, actually due to certain behaviours in football, though it is increasing females are supporting football, it's not common. But equally in the UK, it's not common for Asian students to be supporting football due to racism in football. So actually, an icebreaker question asks them what sport or outside of activity they like enjoying doing might be a better icebreaker. So it's ironic, it's having those innocent conversations. They think they might be doing something really, really well and not, and it's landing badly. And it's having those conversations. And having diverse staff and students in that reciprocal mentoring way, learning from each other. So in the West, we talk about white firstborn privilege. But in Africa, it's firstborn poverty. Because the firstborn leave school first, early, to support their siblings and carry on supporting them. So they're never a higher earner, never get into higher education, and actually end up in severe poverty by old age. The absolute opposite to what actually happens in the UK or in Europe. But I learned that through having colleagues who experienced that and were feeling very guilty because they were the youngest in the family who'd been supported by their eldest, and he'd had the higher education and they hadn't.
I think this would be the last question since we're out of time.
Hey, I'm from India, and so in India, engineering is a really popular degree for both men and women. But what I've noticed is that there are some fields of engineering where women feel more included, like computer science or biotechnology, and in others where there's sort of like an unspoken discouragement, like mechanical or chemical engineering. I was wondering if you found something like that at Kent, and what did you do to deal with it?
So that's true. So in the UK, biomedical engineering is really, really popular with females. Chemical engineering is, mechanical's not. And that's because the perception is they think mechanical engineering is physical. And yes, our upper body strength is 40% less than men. So, it is. But mechanical engineering isn't a physical subject. So it's about challenging that. And the reality is we work on computers these days and do things, and we have workshops, so we design equipment so that it is more inclusive and challenge that environment. So it's about changing those perceptions. And at the end of the day, construction industry and civil engineering used to be pretty much the worst, but because of the Institute of Civil Engineering, but actually significant work done here in London, because the Elizabeth line, the Thames sewage work, the Lord Mayor set criteria on those businesses. They had to achieve 30 to 35% female staff, and it wasn't cleaners. And so that drove a different conversation and forced people to think about it in different ways and going into those schools. So it's work in progress. It's not fast enough. I know it isn't. I got to 19% actually across engineering, mechanical and everything. But that's not good enough. We've got to keep going.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Nortcliffe. Thank you.